Welcome to Close Up Radio, where our hosts Doug Llewellyn and Jim Masters engage today's top thinkers from around the world to bring you information, inspiration, and thought-provoking ideas you can put to use in your personal and professional life right now. Covering a broad range of topics, Close Up Radio digs deep to discover what makes today's top thinkers tick. Close Up Radio, where ideas matter. And now, here's today's host, Doug Llewellyn.
Well, hi, everybody. As I always say, welcome back to Close Up Talk Radio. Nice to have you with us. Today, we are going to focus on a fascinating gentleman and his background, which makes him the perfect person to fill the role of an expert witness, especially in the fields when it deals with the fields of architecture and construction. He is so knowledgeable in those areas, he has become really a very trusted and important gentleman to call upon in some very big criminal cases when he comes into court to testify. I think he's best described as an old-school architect, a construction manager, and a seasoned warrior with an uncommon memory tank, and an incredible journey through many different roles in our legal system. His extensive training and experience, coupled with a true keen awareness of the role of psychology, intuitive people skills, and insightful analytical skills, has made him an expert for many subject matters beyond his base studies and experiences in the fields of architecture and construction management. He has a really broad experience leading cross-discipline terms of design and engineering professionals and construction management teams, and he has offered expert testimony throughout his career as an architect and a construction executive, and gee whiz, this goes on for more than 30 years he's been doing this. His uniqueness as an expert witness comes from his ability to see things that the plaintiff or the defendant and their counsel aren't aware of. They just don't know it. And as a result, Fred has served in different capacities as an expert witness, a criminal witness, a defendant with a federal agency, and as a plaintiff on behalf of federal agencies. And according to him, being an expert witness is really, it comes down to telling a story and telling it in such a way it can be understood by not just the parties represented, but by, most importantly, the jury, who most of the jury members know nothing about this subject, for the most part, that they're dealing with. His stories, he says, are not told on a level where the average listener understands it. And not his stories, but most stories. And it's a matter of how you want to put the story together so it will deliver the best result, and so the jury can understand it. And he does that with unwavering conviction. He's had a fascinating career, and it's pretty amazing about what he is doing right now, how it has turned out. So, again, his name is Fred Lott. He's based in Westport, Connecticut, and it's a delight for us to have him on the mic with us today. Fred, welcome aboard. Nice to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's good to be with you and have the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners.
Well, listen, it's a delight to talk to you. We all listen. The listeners, we all listen. We all learn from listening to people like you. I get exposed to people like you doing these broadcasts, and I find it amazing. And it's an honor to talk to you. Let me just talk to you a little bit about. Give us a capsule of your background in these fields. I know you have lots of information and experience in the fields of architect and construction. I guess you began your career as an architect. Would that kind of be right? Straighten me out.
That's right. No, you're correct. That was 44 years ago, and it has evolved in many directions with experience in a lot of many areas of both architecture and then evolving as architecture evolved into construction management. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, what kind of things did you typically were you doing home design, or were you dealing in the corporate arena, buildings and factories and things like that?
My project involvement has included small residential projects all the way up to the Freedom Tower project, working on projects that are national as well as international.
Wow. Obviously, that gives you a wealth of background in the field. And as an architect, you became a construction manager. Were you one of these guys who would design a building and then go out while it was being built and pay close attention to what was going on? Is that right?
Well, that talks about the history of being an old school architect. When I began my practice, the old school architects actually took on the liability and responsibility for putting all the parts together, including the programming, the design, the specifications, the costing, the construction oversight. And over the years, as people have become more specialized or even lazy, the field of construction management came into being. So I've gone through that transition, and I'm able to look at the profession from the early on responsibilities and liabilities from day one all the way up through where I am right now as an expert witness, which is a matter of what we're going to talk a little bit about the story, but it's a matter of accepting your role as a piece of a giant jigsaw puzzle, but what the story of your role of that particular piece is.
Well, obviously, it proves that you've had to have extensive training and experience out on the field when buildings or homes, whatever it is, have been constructed. So you really get to know a little bit of everything. You haven't just sat at a desk, in a high-rise designing something and then handing it off to somebody else and telling them good luck. You've been there. You walk the walk, so to speak. Let me ask you about this business of being. First off, I know we're talking to you because you are an expert witness, and that's the main reason. Do you still or are you still involved in construction or construction management or you designing? Is that still part of your do, or is it beyond you?
Yes,
behind you? You do.
I believe personally, to be a qualified expert witness, you have to continually participate in your base lines of practice and education. You may not do it as you did it in your earlier years, but you need to stay fresh and consistent with what's going on in the industry.
So how'd you get into the business of being an expert witness? How did that happen?
Originally, it starts with the old school architecture, being challenged by general contractors, being challenged by subcontractors, and then having to put the pieces together. So the initial training as an expert witness starts as your initial practice as an architect. And it's very much like building a building. You have to put the pieces of the puzzle together and not create conflict and still protect the interests of the stakeholders involved in the process. And so you're automatically cast into a potential legal arena from day one practicing as an architect.
I guess my question really comes down to, did you hang out a shingle saying you would be willing to serve as an expert witness, or did some lawyer approach you one day and say, look, we need some advice in this field. We have a very difficult case. We need an expert witness, and we think you'd make a good witness. And you decided to agree, and that's how it started. I don't know. Is that the way it began, or what?
On a higher level, as an expert witness, no. It began with a fairly substantial criminal case that involved my participation, at which time I was introduced to the level of stakeholders and how they play in a legal arena relative to that particular case. And from there, it evolved into several other journeys on different kinds of projects, being involved as a participant, a mediator, a negotiator. All of these things play as an expert witness. Wow.
I would imagine when you began your career, you really didn't think this was going to be an aspect you'd get heavily involved in, did you? I'm sure that.
It's not something they teach, well, at least when I went to architectural school, that's not something that they prepare you for. So this was an adverse turn, but it's similar to like collecting your receivables. There are a lot of things in base architectural education that's not taught, or didn't used to be taught.
Well, how would you describe what makes an expert witness? What's the key to it?
There are two parts. One of them we'll talk about a little bit more today. But you have to have a strong basis of integrity on how you're going to work as an expert witness, because that will prevail in every aspect of what you're doing, whether you're consulting, whether you're being deposed, or whether you're in the courtroom for testimony. If the integrity is not there, you will be undone, either by legal challenge or by your own testimony before a jury.
That makes sense. Makes total sense. And by the way, the way you referred to it, does your talent and expertise as an expert witness, I am just automatically thinking it always ends up in a courtroom, and you're testifying, being deposed by lawyers and testifying before a judge and a jury. But I gather there are more avenues that are using your capabilities. Am I right? It's not always in a courtroom?
Well, I'd like to speak to that just for a moment, because that's not always going to be in a courtroom. In fact, probably more so, the issues are settled or discussed or mediated prior to moving to a formal courtroom. And that depends on the legal team and the expert witnesses that they choose. But the expert witness is a key puzzle part, but that expert has to work within the parameters of the legal system and realize that they're only a puzzle part, but a key puzzle part that nobody defends other than the expert witness. So the expert witness has to have that integrity and that in-depth knowledge with the information they're presenting, of course subject to the protocols and procedures that the legal team hopefully helps you with in each particular case, as each case is a new puzzle or a new story.
And would I be right in saying the people who come to you, and I assume they're mostly attorneys, who would come to you to represent their case as an expert witness, they are depending on you to help convince the jury that their client is innocent, right? So you're testifying on their behalf.
Well, actually, it starts a little bit earlier. It can start with individuals that call you. It can start with law students working for lawyers, paralegals. Sometimes it takes a while to work your way up the chain with your story, as I'm going to call it, or your credentials to the lawyers themselves. So you're always presenting that single jigsaw puzzle part, which is the individual expert's story, to those components as you move through the system. And the lawyers, when it gets to that point, or even sometimes below the actual trial lawyers, they have to get a feeling for what it is you're telling them. So these people that are starting new in the profession oftentimes don't understand the case or what you're talking about as an expert. So you have to focus on being able to tell your story in language that the people understand. From the day you make the initial contact when that person is calling you to getting him before the jury. And if you have an incredible story to tell, but you can't tell it to where the jury understands it, then your story's lost, and you will be challenged.
Now, most of these cases don't involve situations in which would that be right? I mean, they don't involve a construction of, let's say, a building where a major accident happened that you had designed the architecture for, or you were the construction manager. That's not typically the case. These are cases on incidents that took place maybe somewhere in California, and you're in Connecticut, and they bring you in to help substantiate their story. Would that be right?
That's correct. And, there's only been one time in my professional career that someone challenged me on the type of glass used in a gymnasium, and that was discussed outside the courtroom so that they could understand what the story was. But I do practice as an expert across the United States and sometimes in a foreign country. We had 2 of those cases. And it depends on the particular case. So there are a lot of sub-niches within the field of architecture and or construction management that would produce something other than what you might see as a headline that says architecture or construction defect.
Well, the point is, when you get called in to be an expert witness, you really have to get heavily involved in the story and knowing what happened, right? I mean, you've got to learn the details. Wouldn't that be true? You'd have to.
Well, I'm going to suggest it's a little deeper than that. You have to have a little bit of insight, because an individual or legal counsel sometimes or the company has their opinion of the story, and you have to look through their rose-colored glasses to see what the story might really be. So you'd have to do a little bit of work like Sherlock Holmes or detective work to actually begin to put it together to decide, is there a real case? Is it just their expectations that they're going to look for an early gold mine? And you have to have a little bit of in-depth experience doing that, and whether you want to be involved in a case that's not a real case, it's just a gold-digging case. And I try to step away from anything like that. But what's more important is when you talk with the people that have come to you, sometimes in what they present to you, you see something that's a lot more obvious in the case that they should be presenting. And where there was a minimal opportunity for a legal win or a legal settlement, what is obvious that they've overlooked because they see it as their story and not the overall story, everything changes. But that expert has to keep in mind they are one small puzzle piece of the overall puzzle, which you have to depend on legal counsel to put that puzzle together. But you have to be absolutely clear on your particular puzzle part.
Absolutely. So the point is, it takes a good bit of work on your behalf. You just don't come in at the last minute and go into a courtroom or an arbitration setting and give testimony. You've had to do your homework before you get involved.
Absolutely,
yeah.
But it involves more than that, because when you walk into the courtroom, you have to remember you're conveying your puzzle part or your story, and it's dependent on your character and your mannerisms, the way you talk, your body language, your conviction, your presence, and how you convey your integrity.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting, because there are some people, I gather, who are just as credible as you and experienced as you, who could go into a courtroom and fall apart, not be convincing at all. Wouldn't that be true?
It goes a little deeper. You need to watch the opposing counsel as well as the jury members for the same thing, their body language, how they're responding, how they're receiving what you're saying, or even if they're listening. And that really kind of gets into a term that I'm very fond of using. It's physiology. It's every aspect of any legal case or opportunity has a certain physiology. And physiology in absolute, basic understanding is how one physically and mentally responds to a particular situation. Well, I like to look at it a little broader. Every aspect of any legal case is going to respond to another component part. So you start looking at the physiology of not only the people, of the experts themselves, of the lawyers themselves, and sometimes lawyers try to knock you off your feet because, especially for the opposing side, they're challenging you. They're going to challenge everything that you say because they are focused on representing their client. And you have to be pretty strong in your conviction and integrity to present properly and watch what I call the physiology of the courtroom, the physiology of the deposition and the lawyers, and more importantly, there's one other aspect that comes into play. It's the physiology of the opposing, quote-unquote, expert witnesses. And that has been an area of interest for me on particular cases where it's obvious to me that the credibility of the opposing expert witness is in strong question, and actually have gone through litigation and caused the expert witness to be removed from the hearing or discredited in total. So that gets back to integrity of what the expert witnesses are presenting from day one, and the ability, and now most of this ability is based on tremendous number of years of experience, and it's not just professional experience, it's educational experience and your own personal journey experience mixed together that sends up red flags as to what that opposing expert witness might be saying that's absolutely incorrect.
It's fascinating. You're almost like an actor who's on stage when you go into the courtroom to testify. I don't bring it down to that level, but you have to be aware of all of these things. How the jury is responding to you, how you're responding to that opposing attorney who's trying to debunk your testimony, you really have to have your wits about you. No question about it. Or
I wouldn't dispute that, except sometimes an actor is with a question mark after it. And I have to stress that your story is nonfiction. It's based on fact, and your artist's liberty that you take in presentation is how you dress, how you walk, and how you present your own self. Beyond that, if you start getting into nonfiction, you're not going to last long at all.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean that. But I just meant there are a lot of things you have to be aware of, other than telling,
absolutely
the positive truth and things like. And also the aspect of debunking another expert witness's testimony. That's a whole different ballgame that hadn't occurred to me. Do me a favor. I know you've done so many different kinds of cases in your career, but give me an example of the kinds of situations you've been brought into and that you've been involved in. And by the way, when you do get involved, how long of an engagement is it for you? Do you have to sit through the case and listen to it in the courtroom so you know what has been said up to that point, or not necessarily?
Well, actually, you can present your evidence either personally or as fact that's presented without your presence. You can be in the courtroom if you're requested to be in the courtroom, or you can observe remotely, which is what's happening quite a bit in quite a few legal cases. But you have to remember, it's your puzzle piece, and the lawyers have a much bigger job than just your little puzzle piece. But some of the cases, when we talk about debunking an opposing expert witness, well, they list their credentials. And I recently went through one. I'm not going to get into too much of the details, but they were an expert in several legal cases previously. And to me, there were some flagrant red flags, and I brought that to counsel's attention. Those were used in deposing questions. And unfortunately, that has now put several prior legal cases into question because this expert witness was used as an expert and in reality didn't qualify as an expert. And I'll give you an example, because the experts, they look at your education quite a bit, whether it's continuing or whether it's past. And one particular case, this expert said, I'm educated in such and such. When counsel actually challenged him, based on what I told counsel, the education that this particular expert referred to was a 1-hour class that was taken 20 years ago. So you have to look at the credibility of what the expert is saying. And once you find one like that, then the expert usually pretty well unravels across the board.
Yeah, I can understand that. It seems to me you also help the attorneys that you're working with shape their case, because you know things that they don't know about, or you can hear testimony that they aren't aware, and you can help them fashion their testimony in the courtroom. They depend a lot on you when they bring you into a case, don't they?
Yes, but I would like to address what you just said. The attorneys shape the case, but you feed them the information for them to work with. You have to remember, the lawyers are very much like the jury. They know law. They know law forwards and backwards, and I don't want to ever come off like I'm practicing law. I depend on the lawyers for that. But they probably have almost zero comprehension of your areas of expertise. So now you have to become the teacher, or at least lead them to where they self-educate in conjunction with what you're saying. But the courtroom strategy or the courtroom presentation of what they choose or don't choose to present rests solely with the counsel.
All right. That's a good point. Good point. Tell me, we're slowly running out of time here. I'd like to get a little idea of the kinds of cases you've been brought into to testify on, because there are a lot of different kinds. Run through a couple of them for me, if you don't mind. Any names or anything like that. Just cases, kinds of cases.
Bribery, influence of public officials, construction defects, contract language, on payments that weren't made during the construction process, scheduling conflicts, material performance, quality assurance. But you're looking mostly on the basis of the architect, the engineer, and the construction defects, and oftentimes the architect and engineer negligence, because there's a certain inherent standard of care for responsibility and compliance in both professions, and that's where it starts, and that's what you have to deal with as you go through that. So the cases have included everything from federal agencies, including the FBI, working down through that to state legislation with large corporations, some of them being international corporations, and protecting their best interests. And the interests can be anything from financial to name reputation to branding. And sometimes you're doing this in situations that are extremely difficult because it's obvious that it wasn't intentional. There may be laziness that the matter presented itself. And then, of course, you've got the scallywags that are just in there to dig up anything they can and tell any story that they can to come up with a financial reward. So you have to have your eyes clearly open and your ears open to all the parts that are coming towards you.
Wow, that's just a part of what you were talking about. Architect and engineer negligence, criminal coercion. It's amazing. You're really to be congratulated on. I'm sure this is a pretty fascinating part of your life, I would think, right now. Do you enjoy doing this? Is it fun?
I enjoy telling the true story. I enjoy the discovery work or the intensity of presenting details appropriately, and I enjoy being able to help counsel understand the details of my particular areas of expertise so that they can defend their clients. And it seems, at least from my perspective, the world is becoming more litigious, and there are more and more lawsuits being presented all the time, and they're being influenced in some cases by the media. And one of the things I want to talk to you, I know we're going to do another interview at a later date, but I want to talk about mainstream terminology that's being used all the time as something new, and it's called, the words are influencers. We have a lot of those now, and a lot of use of the word analytics. Well, those are not new. Those have always been here. They're just being presented differently, and it does have an impact on what expert witnesses are doing. And that's something that the next time we join up that I want to talk to you about in detail.
Well, I think that's very important indeed. You'll be back again next week, next Thursday, by the way.
No, not until April.
2 weeks from now, right? April 7th. There we go. Do me a favor. I know you have a website on LinkedIn. If someone wants to get in touch with you, tell me what's the best way to do it. How would you describe it?
To get in touch with me, pick up the phone, 917-371-5149. But if you want to find out more about me, I have extensive professional profile information, educational information posted on LinkedIn. That's at linkedin.com/Fred-Lott. Another one, which is particularly good in the legal arena, is the Seek Expert Witness Directory, which you can go to and search my name, Fred Lott, under www.seek.com.
All right. Well, listen, Fred, for today. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing discussion. We look forward to you coming back again to hear more about your experiences and observations about what is going on in the legal field now, when it comes to the requirements of having an expert witness like yourself testify and contribute. So have a great day, and we look forward to your return. Okay?
Thank you, Fred. I look forward. Thanks.
You got it. Thank you, sir.
Bye.